first and foremost, thank you so much for all the work that you've done. I am an avid listener.
Oh, good.
Yes, I am. Yes. And, I love the aspect of you and your work. Obviously, you and your work is the same thing. That is so incredibly sophisticated and very, very practical. And that is so important for me. And I feel like I come from Central Asia, Kazakhstan. And I speak 3 languages, and a lot of the times my videos are translated to Russian, so that territory is covered as far as, the information that I give them. I'm a filmmaker, so a lot of the times I put videos where I introduce people who give very, very practical knowledge, and this is where this is connecting, because you give that knowledge, and you've helped me personally, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So because your language is English, a lot of your videos are in English, so it's available to vast territory of people who speak the language. However, it's not as available when people don't speak English.
Yeah.
So for that particular reason, would you please tell in short, and however way you want, a little bit of your gifts? I know that your bio is incredible. We could take a whole interview just to talk about what you've overcome and, where you are in your journey. But I would just really want that introduction of you and your abilities for the people at first.
Okay, well, I'm extrasensory, which means I can perceive outside the normal range of the human senses. However, the way that the universe sees it with me specifically is that it's more of a disability than an ability. It's not something that I developed. So the best way to imagine what's going on with me is to realize that we live in a multi-dimensional universe, right? So there are lots of dimensions which we aren't perceiving. We have a body and a brain that is designed to plug into the 3D reality. So there were aspects of my central nervous system, actually, that were, let's say, damaged during the process of gestation. And then after that, actually, in a vaccination process that happened when I was really, really young, like a baby. And it was able to corrode enough of my myelin structures and other aspects of my brain to the degree that I can't plug into the mainframe completely. So it's almost like when a person has a lack of capacity to be fully a part of the matrix. And so I'm perceiving all of these dimensions at once, almost like if you had like one of those old television sets and you've got multiple channels playing at once. So you can zoom into one channel versus another channel versus another one. And if I don't focus in that way, then it's playing all of it at once. Mm-hmm. So that explanation is like an overview, and then it's about the symptomology, therefore, of not being able to plug into the mainframe. One of those is I can't perceive something being static. So if you want to get as close as you could, to seeing the way that I see on a normal daily basis, is to take ayahuasca or something like that has a high degree of DMT, because once you do that, you start to see that there's no such thing as a solid object. Everything is just like this moving energy, and it's all blending into each other, and it's like various degrees of differentiation. And so I can talk to what people call ghosts or thought forms. Guides are around all the time. You'd assume that would be a good thing, but it was torment for me as a child. When I'm looking at people, I can see the aura, right, which is the human energy field. However, what most people think is that the body gives off the aura. Actually, it's the other way. The body is a condensing of the auric field. And so it took a long time for me to figure out even how to put makeup on my face, for example. Because it's like I have to focus at like a certain point of resistance. And, I obviously see people differently because I can actually see through skin down to bones, into the bone marrow. I can zoom in and look at a tiny cell if I want to. And so there's a big degree of my work in the beginning was actually being a medical intuitive, which is no longer a real interest for me, because what I noticed is that, I'm able to actually see people's thoughts and especially emotions. Like when somebody thinks a thought or has an emotion, it actually is a visible pattern in the energy field. So this is actually a good thing. This thing behind me here, this is one of my frequency paintings. This is what's happening inside of a human energy field, are patterns like this. And it's the same for all people. So if somebody feels joy, I can actually watch that pattern in their energy field, and it'll change colors and everything. So what I was able to see in the beginning is that it's these emotions and these thought patterns actually that are feeding into the physical body. So healing for me became a lot less about, telling somebody this is what I see going on with your body and therefore go see a doctor for this. It was like, but behind that pattern is this thought process and this thing you keep doing. And that's actually what's creating this pattern specifically in this place in your body. So much more of my work became about how to change the way that people were perceiving things, how to change their mental and emotional patterns. And so this career as a teacher was born.
Yeah, and we all, it's all about changing your perception, isn't it?
Yes.
I was wondering, while you were telling about yourself, and I cannot help but feel like, wow, yeah, this is something, for me as a person from the outside, if anything, it's very intimidating. You know what I'm saying? I don't get easily intimidated. But how does that feel for you?
That others get intimidated by it?
No. To be that person that majority of people are intimidated by.
Oh, I'm horrible. I think that's probably the worst part of my life, if I was going to be honest, because when you're born this way, you don't know any different. It's sort of like if you're born a dragon, you don't know any different than being a dragon. And even if you're walking around being really sweet, even if you're smelling the roses, people are running. And that's how it's always been since I was little, even with people in my own family. So I didn't understand the reaction at first. And especially when I was younger, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why, if I was talking to people about what their dead relatives were saying, why that would scare them. I didn't understand why it would scare people for me to see everything about them. Because for me, it just is. It's like there wasn't any judgment. There's no judgment in a 5-year-old. Like, for example, when I was little, I could see what was going through the intestinal tract of a person.
Wow.
So like people would be like, what's wrong with me? I have a stomachache. And I'm like, you have to go to the bathroom. And people are like, thanks, Teal. This is really fun to hang out with you. And I don't really understand the shame aspect of a human psyche either. So it's really, really super hard because I'm going to create a reaction in people. So it's a person's willingness to be vulnerable is really the variable for whether they can be around me or not. Otherwise, it's like the self-concept of a physical human is constantly going to fight me. And I didn't understand why to begin with. And it's still painful when it happens today. So
is that why you chose to be born this beautiful? So it helped?
To trigger people. No. You really want the full answer for that one?
Yes.
Well, I was actually designed by committee before coming into this physical reality, specifically to be perceived attractive on all continents. So, because it was understood that is going to make people listen, even if nothing else does. It counts against me, actually, in the same way, but it still is like an attention capturing type of a thing. So,
very, very interesting. Well, thank you. The other thing that keeps running through my mind, your gift must be growing ever since you were a baby and up until now. What's the difference?
It didn't grow. That's the difference between me and everyone else. Yeah, not at all. In fact, it stayed exactly the same because it's a disability. It's not something that's developing. All that has happened is I've gotten way better at figuring out how to interpret it. It's like if you're born with all of the filters blown and you have no idea how to interpret it, how to manage it, what to share, what not to share. I've gotten better at navigating it, and that's what people are noticing as a kind of development. So, like, for example, because I can't see because there's no differentiation in the energy field, right? What people see as negative space, like air, I don't actually see air. Like, there's nothing that isn't this static energy. So a table can have like this energy field that extends far beyond what you would consider to be the physical aspect of the table. And when I was younger, I could not figure that out. So you'd watch me go up to a table and then walk like 5 feet around the table. And I had to learn, okay, well, this is how to discern the difference between what's physical about an object and what's not physical about an object. So I got better at like controlling my aperture is the way I'd like to describe it.
You got to know your tools better.
Yes.
Well, since majority of what I do is about film and film, television, things like that. And my thing is, I really do want to give people some practical tools and self-growth, understanding who you are, like understanding what individual tools are for each one of us is something that I think is super important. How can people develop that within themselves better? As for instance, in listening to a lot of this information, including your videos and videos by other teachers and so on and so forth, there's a lot of talk about resistance. Resistance, which is the form of control, which is an illusion, and so on and so forth. And you understand that consciously, but it's so hard to deal with that. So I would have really loved to get your insight on that.
On resistance specifically?
Yeah, specifically on resistance for a lot of people.
Resistance is quite easy to understand. It's just oppositional force. It's literally that simple. So if you're thinking a thought like, I really want money, and then there's another thought that's, but money never comes to me, you can see that as an oppositional force. That would make both thoughts actually resistant to each other. So the misunderstanding that people have is that when there's resistance, we're often talking about two polarized aspects. Either it's me and someone outside, or it's me and another part of me. It's just that there's this tug of war going on. That's all resistance means. So we have to get attuned to is how resistance feels in our own body. How does that oppositional force feel? And one of the easiest ways that I like to give people to become aware of how that shows up in your body specifically is to think about something that you strongly disagree with, because this person's saying yes and you're like no, right? So if you think about that concept and you really get yourself thinking about it, you'll start to notice sensations in your body, like a tightness, maybe it's a pulling. A lot of people, when they're in a state of resistance, it feels like they're trying to do things despite some part of themselves or despite something in the universe at large. And that feeling in their body is the indication that they're in a state of resistance, or that there's some resistance taking place within them. So then it's about, okay, I understand I'm feeling this resistance. Looking backwards, what was happening? What are these two polarized sides? Is it me and a part of myself? Is it two different thoughts? Is it two different feelings? Is it me and something outside myself? And then we're looking to resolve it. All that releasing resistance is releasing that oppositional force. So what's ironic is, to become a master of releasing resistance, you have become a master of relationship. So it's almost like, how do you get, let me see, two oppositions. How do you get the Democrats and Republicans to agree? Right? It sounds more daunting than it is, believe it or not, because the thing is that there's an unwillingness. What we have to get in general is that unless there's a state of alignment, we're not going to move anywhere. So a lot of times when you're working with your internal parts, like what I mean by that is you've got one part that wants to stay in the relationship, another part that wants to get out as fast as it can. What we got to get first and foremost is that with those two parts, you can't move forward. It's always going to backfire, because the only way to get around that is to find resolve or else to bulldoze, which doesn't work long term. What I mean by bulldoze is I've got a part that doesn't want to do something, but I'm going to do it anyways. What we teach ourselves, rather, when we have that attitude, is that we can't trust ourselves. So most people are walking around the world being like, why don't I trust myself? Because you have no occasion to trust yourself, because from day one you've been taught to bulldoze. And so it backfires in the long run, regardless of whether in the short run it allows us to take an action really quickly. So
when you say bulldoze, you mean tackle that with force as opposed to understanding.
Well, we're not creating resolution. It's to move forward despite there being no resolution. So here's an easy example. I'm going to bulldoze you. Ready? So we're going to go. You and I are going to dinner. And we walk in the door and I'm like, oh, I love this place. And you walk in the door and you're like, I don't feel comfortable here. This is just, I don't know what it is about this place, but I feel triggered. If I go, well, I think you can deal with it. Let's go sit down. I've just bulldozed you.
Right.
And even though that seems like a harsh reaction for me, we are doing that internally all day. I mean, like literally all day.
Yeah.
And then we're like, I wonder why I don't trust myself. You know? So what I'm trying to teach people to do in order to resolve this resistance is to achieve a state of harmony and alignment before we take any action. And once you start to learn how to do that internally, it becomes much easier to do that in the external world, to create that kind of harmony. And I can't, like, what happens on a company when you can create that and then take an action together, it's incredible. Because, like, I want you to imagine that we've got a stream of water. And this is another thing that I will try to explain as in depth as I can, because it applies to this concept of resistance. When you give rise to a desire, which is not something that can be avoided, this is a subconscious thing, and even when it becomes conscious, it's still something that naturally occurs because it's part of your time-space construct that you opted into upon coming into life. When you give rise to a desire, it creates a kind of momentum on an energetic level. And so that's why, I mean, have you ever noticed it doesn't take a super spiritual person. You have a desire to go to a yoga class. Suddenly you're in some random bathroom and there's like advertisement for yoga class, right? The universe starts to create this like vortex of energy that begins to attract all of these necessary conditions. So understanding that the minute that a desire is born, it creates an energetic momentum is important, because it means that anytime we have a thought that opposes that desire now, we're turned against the current, which is no different than when we're in a stream and we turn against the stream, and now we've got like a, you know, like, what do you call those things? Like rapids. Depending on the degree of desire, that's more momentum. If we turn upstream, we could be drowning in those rapids. It's a lot different with a person who's got a lot of desire around something to have a thought that opposes that desire, or to have a person oppose that desire is going to cause a lot more pain. In the same way that if I turn upstream against a very fast-moving river, I'm drowning, as opposed to I'm in a little creek and I turn upstream. It's just like obnoxious, you know. So I want you to imagine that I've got a boat in that stream. And in that boat, there are 6 people. And 4 of them are faced downstream, but 2 of them are faced upstream. How much less quickly am I going to get to my destination? And a lot of people, what they're finding in life when they're stuck is that they've got this internal opposition going on, and they've got like 4 men versus 4 men. So it's just... Right. Yeah.
So how do then you achieve that kind of alignment, the balance from which you can build your world?
It totally depends on the circumstance. That's why it's like impossible for me to say it's always this way. The answer is you find resolution. So if I've got part of me that does not want the relationship and part of me that does, I don't continue going about my life trying to make the relationship work. And I also don't end the relationship. I sit, this is what the meditative process and the internal introspective process really should be all about. All right, I'm going to face both parts directly. I'm going to get into their psychology, each one, as deep as I possibly can. And I'm going to go in with the understanding that I can't invalidate either of them. They both are there for a very important reason. And based off of really listening to, feeling into, coming to understand both of these parts of myself as deep as I can, suddenly the third option is going to arise out of it. For example, a lot of times when you go into an aspect of yourself that wants to do something and an aspect that doesn't, the one that doesn't actually does want to. It's just terrified or has some other explanation. It's very easy then to problem solve. To be like, okay, so I understand that that part of me really does want to do it, and so I'm just afraid. Okay, so what might I do to mitigate the fear? And sometimes that's all it takes to create a click into alignment.
Right.
Yeah.
So you actually have reintroduced me to the idea of shadow work. Yeah, because as a teenager, I've read a lot. Carl Jung was always one of my favorites and stuff like that. But you have reintroduced that concept to me in a very, very practical way. And ever since I've, ran into your videos, I've been doing that. in the moment, usually, even if I'm like somewhere amongst people, I'll take a moment to kind of analyze the emotion, not call it negative, but just go down in history and kind of understand. So what I'd like to, and I have my own routine now, but what I'd like to kind of give our audience today is the basic steps of it, if possible. And what do you do after you have nailed that very first experience? What do you do then? How do you undo the damage?
Ooh.
Sorry, is that a lot?
That what you asked me just now is like going up to a professional surfer and saying, what I need is that, you know, I need you to give us a synopsis on surfing. The problem is that like it's all, if there's a million different types of waves and each one has to be approached differently.
Okay.
So what I'm more concerned with is people becoming aware that there's a wave. Because if they're aware that there's a wave, they're going to start to perceive the differences between this one versus that one. The reason that the question in and of itself doesn't work to tell someone how to do shadow work is because shadow is simply what you don't see, that you don't see.
Right.
So that people who are watching can understand this, I'm going to just ask you a question. What is something that you know 100%? Like, I'm kind of an expert on this.
Right. So something that I know about what? About myself? About
anything.
I'm a female.
Okay. You know that you're a female. What's something you don't know?
What's going to happen in 5 minutes?
Okay. You know that you don't know what will happen in 5 minutes. Now, if I ask you, what do you not know that you don't know? You're not going to be able to answer the question. That's shadow.
Right.
So it's like you discover a pattern in yourself, right? So you're going through life, you feel this negative emotion. By going into the negative emotion one day, maybe you realize, oh my gosh, the reason that I keep snapping at my boyfriend or my girlfriend is because I'm terrified they're going to leave me. This is bizarre. I'm noticing now that I'm pushing people away before they push me away. That's a very simple pattern. But you didn't know that you didn't know it. That's shadow work.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
And so there's no like one size fits all for becoming aware of what you didn't know that you didn't know. Mm-hmm. There's a billion tools. I mean, all kinds of things we could consider shadow work. If people take shamanic medicines, that could be considered shadow work because it shows you what you didn't know that you didn't know. If you go to a seminar and you're talking to somebody, they might be able to tell you something that you didn't know that you didn't know. If you go into your emotions, this is where I like to have people start. So if you want a practical little tool here, most people are educated from day one to ignore their emotions and to bulldoze their emotions. Emotions are always indicating a message. So it's basically your body saying, look, you don't know that you don't know this, but I'm trying to tell you this, right? And people are not listening to it because they're taught not to. This is how this whole thing starts, right? You're in childhood. I want you to imagine that you're feeling all this negative emotion because you don't want to go to school. What does mom say? Or dad?
You have to.
So then what are we going to do with the emotion?
Shove it.
There's no point in you coming up because it's going anyway.
Yeah.
But we've just silenced our own emotions and we've taught ourselves to ignore it. So now when its voice speaks up, we've already got ourselves on the default of like. So the most important thing, if you want my 2 cents on it in terms of how people can get in touch with their shadow, it is to begin the process of really getting in touch with how they feel. So I've got this entire video on this, but if I want to give people a little bit of a tool, it's that they would set their phone, like the alarm clock, at intervals every day. And I want this to be manageable for people. Some people choose to do every 10 minutes. Other people, it's like every hour, you know. And they have a little booklet with them. And when that timer goes off, usually they have to close their eyes at first. After a while, it's not a problem. Like you can register what's happening emotionally without doing anything. But they have to close their eyes and really pay attention specifically to sensations. When we talk about emotions, most people don't understand what the hell that means because there's all kinds of labels and a person isn't really in touch with what the meaning of their sensations specifically are. So Like anxiety, for example, may show up like tightness. It may show up like buzzing. It may show up like actually a cavernous type of a sensation in the stomach. It depends on, which person's experiencing it. So what I want people to do when that timer goes off is to look for and write down those sensations. And I want them to do that for a full week. And then after that full week, they can start looking for if there's an emotion, like a label for an emotion that fits with those sensations. Oh, all those sensations I've just listed feels like sadness. All those sensations I've just listed, depression, right? And it's really easy actually, because now we've got the internet. There's like you're going to get lists of emotions. I mean, hundreds of emotions, and just look down and see which one sort of feels like it matches, right? So then you're starting to learn what each emotion shows up like in your body. And based off of that, then the next week it's about identifying what was the cause of that emotion and what you're making it mean. So it's the thoughts associated with that emotion and the experiences that are associated with that emotion. So if I notice I've got these sensations, those sensations mean sadness. What are the thoughts that I was thinking right now before that emotion showed up? What happened right before that emotion showed up? What am I making it mean? And if that is how you start to really unpack these underlying messages that your being is trying to tell you. And then it's about consciously deciding what to do with that. What do I want to do with those thoughts? Do they seem particularly accurate or not? Do I need to communicate those thoughts? Is this one of those circumstances where looking at the thought, I'm like able to see, oh, it's ridiculous. That's not really what's going on. It's about consciously dealing with whatever the circumstance is in a super conscious way. And the only way to do that is if you're really tuned in to what's happening in the here and now in reality. Does that make sense?
The way that I deal with that usually, and daily, almost daily basis, sometimes I forget to do that, but I do it often enough, is that I don't even label those emotions anymore. I look at the imprint of that, the kind of like, without splitting it even, just the way that I feel in the moment. For instance, I've realized that I dealt with a lot of betrayal, and man, women, doesn't matter, So what I did is simply, I went in my meditational state, I went into certain particular experiences, and I've been able to identify that imprint, emotional imprint, kind of, that has so many of those emotions all together, so I don't even bother labeling them, you know what I'm saying? And so then I was asking myself, when did I feel it first? And then went back to, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like I've got a whole process for that. Yeah. Well, I got it from you. So, and then, so I went back and I found that without even having to identify each emotion, but because in combination it becomes something completely different, right? Yes.
Then each of these emotions separately, because I maybe feel, I don't know, anger separately in different circumstances, but all together, all of that.
Let's call it a cocktail. Yeah.
Little cocktail.
Yeah, that cocktail amounts to what I'm calling an energetic signature. So that signature is something that you can sink deep into and invite into your body and actually use in order to access memories you may not even consciously have anymore that are creating or being triggered by the circumstance that you're in. And then throughout that process, create a resolution, which is then, it's really powerful, not just because you're creating the resolution on a mental and emotional and energetic level, but also because it tells you a lot about what you need to change in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. How do you create that resolution? My question is, say, for example, with this particular example, when my first memory of that was a memory when I was probably 5 years old or so, and I've been for the first time betrayed by my best friend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I remembered that, and I forgot all about that experience because I didn't keep it in my memory. Why would I? But it kept coming back, recurring in different forms and different people. I don't blame them anymore, which is a good thing. So when you identify that first experience, what do you do with it?
So in the process in and of itself, that's sort of self-explanatory, because you get back into the memory, and then first what you do is you validate the way that your childhood self feels in that memory, for example. Because that's what people don't understand about why a lot of these things get stuck, is because there's no validation. An emotion that is not validated cannot move forward. What I mean by that is it makes perfect sense why you're feeling this way. It's the opposite of the message most of us get in childhood, by the way. Because it always will. Emotions never lie. They're always a perfect, exact reflection of what we're thinking, regardless of whether what we're thinking is accurate or not. The emotions are always perfect. So it's about you validate the emotion and you spend time in it. So acceptance is actually just to swallow the reality, right? Acceptance isn't, oh, and so I love it. No way in hell. It's just, I accept this is the reality. And so instead of resisting the fact that that's reality, you're allowing the fact that that's reality. And what you'll feel is that goes through your whole entire body. And from that point, you can actually change into a cognitive resolution, which will only make sense relative to the specific memory that a person has found themselves inside. So, for example, in that circumstance, what did you need to have happen in order to feel like they're a little bit better relative to that friend back then? Did somebody need to catch her in the act of betraying you like that and call her on it? That may suggest that you needed a defense. That was a missing need for you.
I should have said that.
There could be a billion different things, and it depends on the person. That's why it's such an individual process, because one person might just need to run away. Another person might need to get violent with her, actually, and that would be the improvement mentally and emotionally. I realize that's difficult for people to understand. It's like my least favorite part to try to explain of my process, but it's really important, especially if people have been traumatized in a particularly powerless space and on a physical level. So whatever we're looking for in terms of a solution to this circumstance, but within the construct of the memory, it tells us a great deal actually about what our actual missing needs are. And then we can carry that over into our adult life. So I've got an example, which is a fun one if you want it.
Yes.
Because this one's more approachable, I think, for most people. So let's say that there's this woman, and she always feels as if in her life people are overriding everything that she is. And she's become super, super uptight. She's become the person who's just constantly conforming to whatever the company wants, whatever her colleagues want, and it was really a work problem we were dealing with. When she went into the sensation of how horrible that is to just not have your opinion count, she went back into a memory with her mother. Her mother was a single mother who was a first-generation immigrant, and she was just all about, my daughter's going to be a success. She's going to go to the best colleges there are. No, you're not going to dress like that when you're 5. You're going to dress like people perceive you, that you are, you have credibility. So she always loved tutus and pink things when she was younger, right? And mom was like, no. You're going to wear this pencil skirt with this blouse that looks professional so people take you seriously, right? So it was the whole issue with the office actually was this wounding relative to mom and never letting her choose her own outfits. So we were able to resolve it and able to make the mother, this is what she needed for resolve. She actually brought in this, a guide of hers who she really trusts to come down and have a little talk to mommy about how this is about her insecurity about not being seen credibly. This had nothing to do with the daughter. And the mom got it, stopped putting pressure on the daughter in the memory. We created this whole resolution thing. But that then tells her, okay, now that I feel what that feels like, I'm stepping into my life with this different perspective and different vibration about me, because I know what that feels like now to be able to have, to stand by my laurels and have people stop putting that pressure on me. Now it's not as okay for people to put pressure on her, right? So the first interesting application of this in terms of needs was she went to the office, and the next time that happened, she was like, no, I'm in a business meeting, and I'm going to stand by exactly what I know needs to happen with the company. I'm not going to be the okay and then roll your eyes person. Second application, she comes home from that first day, walks into her closet, and has a complete meltdown because she realizes everything in her closet is beige, like everything. So she's like, this isn't even me. I don't even know what to do with this. So she calls me in a crisis for it. She's like, I can't even go in here. I don't know what to do with it. I'm like, well, what would feel good? Do you want to donate all of it? She's pretty well to do. She was a lawyer. So I suggested going on shopping spree. She's like, yeah, I want to go shopping. I'm like, well, what do you want to do with the existing clothes? And no matter what I took her through, nothing felt good except for cutting it up. So it was a cathartic experience for her to take a pair of scissors and literally just cut up her entire closet. So next time I see her, she walks through the door and she's in bright colors and is so much happier. So that's one example of how doing this type of resolution process, and then based off of doing that, knowing what your actual needs are and taking those into how do I change circumstances in my current life to match that.
Completely, maybe from a different point of view, but different subject matter maybe. But I'm seeing a lot, and it's got nothing to do with me or my children, thank God. But I see a lot of people around who are suffering by being tightly related to people with victim mentality. And there's very little, I mean, there's a lot of information on that type of, you know, I call it a blanket, because I feel like they close themselves off and they just never come out or something like this. But what I think is very tough is for the loved ones who live with this kind of person, they can't divorce them because it's their child or something. For them to deal with that, I think if you can give us some sort of advice, because there is a need, there's definitely a need of, you know, healing that type of relationship. Maybe there's something that they can do to help their loved ones who have decided to take on that kind of mentality. You know what I mean?
Okay, so the first thing to understand about the mentality is that going at it where you're sort of calling it out as victim control and stuff like that is the worst thing you can do. And this is one thing that I can't stand about the spiritual field. Because the spiritual field has written a lot about how victim mentality is really, really bad. So now even the word victim comes with this stigma about how wrong you are if you're in it. There are two problems I have with this. The first is there are absolutely victims in our world. And it doesn't matter whether we have chosen into an experience from outside this dimension or not. No physical human would choose into it consciously. No one. So they are actually victims. And if we're like, well, there's no such thing as victim consciousness, how far are we going to take this? You know, a girl gets raped and we're now going to be like, well, don't go into victim consciousness. No, she is a victim. So the problem that, so this dovetails with the second point. My second point is that if somebody is in victim mentality, they were a victim. Without exception. The question is when. So we have to go back to that original experience. Yes, you were a victim. You are absolutely a victim in this circumstance. Now what? It's about the now what. Most people are like, you're not a victim, instead of being like, yes, you were, now what? You were. So with that validation, then we can come into the awareness of what we're going to do with it now, because that, you know, that experience can't be undone. It can be resolved, not undone.
Right.
And then it's about people understanding, you know, that's a powerful position. Most people don't actually get that, how it's a powerful position. And those of us that have an issue with it often don't realize that we are putting the person into the position where that's the only powerful position they can have. Does that make any sense, or do you need me to go further with that one?
Would you?
Okay. So if I'm a particularly dominating parent, if my kid reacts, I'm going to either smack them, or I'm going to throw them in a room they can't get out of, or I can control them in some way. So the only way for a child to be safe actually is to start manipulating, because there's no space in my reality for this person. So with somebody who's stuck in a victim sort of mentality, you actually have to make them realize that in and of itself was their strategy. Like if they're crying, for example, it makes them seem like the underdog. Then what do other people do? That's the most common reason that people do that. They always rally around whoever's crying and whoever looks like they're the one that's in pain. So it's a genius strategy, actually, for getting support from the social group. But they got to see that they are doing that consciously, and that's pretty easy to show them as long as you don't make it wrong. You can't make it wrong. It's got to be genius, right? But then it's about rolling out the red carpet for these people to actually speak from their raw and like angry truth. And we got to make that okay so that they no longer need that. Like you got to show them you can actually be safe in your anger. You can be safe in those more powerful emotions, right? And we are the ones not making them safe to do that often. So we're keeping them in the pattern without realizing it. So it's almost like we're these real, you know, because we're used to it. Most of us living around those people own our power, right? But we don't realize how terrifying that is. And so we don't coax them into it being safe for them to do that. Instead, we're just like, fight me. But that's like a heavyweight boxer getting in the ring with somebody who really feels powerless. You know, it's not going to work. The first thing they're going to do is, you know, so somebody rushes in.
I hear you completely. Yeah. And what do we do if it's not someone, if it's elective? Like, for example, it's not a part of your family, but it's someone you know, and you're in the moment with them, and you being exposed to that kind of behavior.
It totally depends on the circumstance for me. Sometimes I'm not going to call it out because it's about figuring out what those emotions are below what their behavior is. What are they trying? It's like you want to always, with people, if you want to really get to be great with them, you got to go underneath the behavior. So if I recognize it, what's underneath this? They're absolutely terrified of me right now. So I will turn the attention completely towards can you be honest with me about what's scaring you so bad about me in this moment or the circumstance in this moment? And then, it's easier when they're like, for example, they'll share their problem, and I'll be like, well, can I share the fact that I have vulnerability and I have fear right now, or does that seem like it's not okay right now? Because that usually, for people who are in victim consciousness, it usually is a shock that anyone else feels that vulnerability. And then they know, like, if their answer is no, it's only okay if I share that it takes a really, really unconscious person to like be asked that question and not realize, oh, I'm being the person that's the problem here.
Very cool. Thank you so much. I don't know. I have an idea about kind of talking to you about this. You know how they say generally this culture is that way and that culture is this way. There is like, besides the traditions and things like that, but if you go deeper, like for instance, in certain regions, and I'm talking about a region where I come from right now, okay, there are some a new found, I don't like this word, but negative experiences that a lot of people all of a sudden experiencing due to certain thing. And I've made a movie about it. It was on screens. It's in polygamy. Okay. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways that people are trying to justify that and so on and so forth. But is there a way for, besides putting it on screens, besides talking about it, is there any way to influence people so that, you know what I'm saying, like in the body of a nation kind of thing, to try to undo this a horrible tradition or whatever you call it?
Yeah, it's all about changing thought patterns.
Right. That was a short answer.
I know it was. I feel like sometimes like what you're doing is making it very vague in general. Okay. So it's easier actually to explain what would happen on a mass scale if you go to the individual example. Does that make sense? Right. Well, the movie that I made actually dedicated that to a memory of my cousin who passed away in that circumstance, because it's illegal. I'm just going to make it completely clear. It's illegal to have more than one wife over there, but they decided that because we're the descendants of the great nomads, let's bring that tradition, into the normal lives of today, and let's make women yield to that, because man has to have more than, it's BS, as yeah. Obviously, but there are, yeah, I do. Yeah, but there are, speaking of victims, there are definite victims. Yes. There are women who get completely emotionally scarred for life. There are children that will never grow up without they will grow up basically with all kinds of insecurities and daddy issues and all kinds of stuff. But there are definite actual victims who lose their lives, like my cousin. So the answer is it shouldn't be you. Changing these thought patterns, because even when you're speaking, because it's traumatized you. I mean, that's the reality. I can hear the pain in your voice. You can feel it in your body. Yes. That's an indication that you're not going to be in a space to change someone's mind, because you're already in opposition to those that practice polygamy. Interesting. In order to genuinely work, and I mean, this is really, it's powerful what I'm saying right now, because I mean, you can make films and do things like that, but when you're working directly with the psychology of an individual, there can be absolutely no judgment towards it. No, you cannot resist them. So the only person, for example, that could work with a serial killer is the person who has made killing somebody else not wrong in general. Isn't that interesting?
Very.
Now, I know that a lot of people are going to resist that because they're like, no, it's objectively wrong. But I'm like, all right, walk in the room, see what happens. You got to walk in with the room. You're not like losing the part of you. You're not becoming a serial killer by doing that. You've got to lose the aspect that's in opposition to that person completely. Get into their psyche to a degree where you could actually understand why someone would do that completely. And then you'll be able to find those doorways that create a crack in someone's psychology. So you should let people go into that culture that really don't have a problem with polygamy.
Yeah, I wouldn't know where to start.
Well, this is the thing. One thing that must be said is that if we love to make it first about the external problem, right?
Right.
Without making it about our pain and what we need to do to resolve that. Because when we actually resolve our pain around something, the charge around it goes away and the way that we deal with it in the external world changes. It's not like, veganism's my thing, right? So it's not, if I come from that place of personal pain and I'm walking around like, yeah, you cannot call yourself a fucking environmentalist right now and say that you eat meat. Sorry. Like, I'm not going to create any pliability anywhere. Because I've already gone in swinging. Of course they're going to swing back. Right. So, okay, why is this? Where is the pain coming from? How do I relate to the animal, right? And what's unresolved in me relative to that? Being completely powerless, having people do things that are completely unattuned with me. What do I need to change in my life on a day-to-day basis so that I don't feel that way anymore? So I'm not in that disempowered state. And what happens is, it's not like I get any less vegan. What happens is that I'm like, all right, I know how to approach this collective issue from a space where I'm not causing more pain by, doing the same thing actually to people who eat meat that they do to animals. Which is the whole, for example, it's a problem with vegan activism. They're like, no more suffering. I'll create suffering so there's no suffering. It's like, yeah. So the reason I'm going about that is that like we have to resolve the resistance we have, which is creating that pain internally before we take on any of these external world-based things. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is part of the reason I'm traveling so much. I'm traveling so much because I'm at a point in my life where there's almost no resistance to these dark aspects within the universe, which makes it particularly easy for me to work with them. And it makes it easy for me to see where those loopholes are, right? Instead of defending a woman's right to have freedom, I'm like, well, okay, well, let's look at the psychology behind why you even want polygamy. I mean, is this something that you actually want? So there's a lot more freedom to kind of question somebody in a way where they start to open up. It's the openness that creates the change, always.
Mm-hmm. I understand, and I will have to give it a lot more thought. And
also, here's another thing that must be said on a societal level. A lot of times what I've noticed is that we're all just victims of victims. So what I notice is that when we get into the perpetrator, into their perspective, like poachers or like serial killers or any of these people who we label as like the worst of human society, and they are creating a problem, right? There's often factors creating them that we're not seeing as a culture. It's that whole thing, and it's hard for us to see relative to our hot button issues, but it's pretty easy to see if you watch a film, for example, about the 1700s. In the 1700s, you've got aristocracy taxing the living daylights in Europe out of the people who just lived on the land. So they couldn't live. So we don't educate them around a right or wrong. We actually take the babies away from the mothers because of this whole wet nurse thing that was happening. I mean, mothers did not raise their own children in Europe. That didn't happen. That was unheard of. So it was the wealthy mothers hand their babies to the poorer mothers, and the poorer mothers hand their babies off to even poorer mothers. And so no kid is around their parent. That's the first thing. Second thing is that they're not getting any like education around morality and all of those really important emotional aspects of upbringing. It's just like, oh, you want to start a fire, this is how to start a fire. And we're making it so that they're absolutely desperate. They don't own a lot of land in a lot of circumstances. They can't actually have access to food. Now we punish them for stealing. So it's obvious to see that there are a lot of these precursor conditions which are actually creating the stealing behavior. And so as a society, what I've noticed is particularly interesting is that when we're trying to deal with this collective issue we have of whatever the problem is, like in your case, men who are practicing polygamy, we got to look at the precursors about what's creating them. And when we solve those, there is no more. Again, in USA, it's about the shooters nowadays, to be honest with you. Look at the precursors that are creating the shooters. Stop looking at the shooters as if some random thing has gone off. Is this epidemic we're seeing the result of prescription meds? A lot of times it is, I'll be honest with you. If you want the precursors of the mass shootings, it's isolation that's never seen and never understood. Even the person who's the most popular person in school can be completely and 100% isolated. I mean, you live near Los Angeles, you know exactly what this looks like. The most popular people in the world are often the most lonely. So is the wallflower. This is a person who feels constantly ostracized. This is a person who does not have access to the same emotional resources other people do, and they're really angry and powerless because of it. And so they can't be significant and matter to someone else, so they're going to be significant by killing them. And if you mix that with the wrong antidepressant medication, you've got a school shooter. So it's like, do we deal with, like, what do we do about school shooters, or we deal with these preconditions that are creating them in the first place? And I wish that mankind had the capacity to do that.
Very, very interesting, because you made me look at it completely differently. That familiar pattern of me, I didn't even recognize how much pain I've had about the issue. And now I wonder if it's along the same lines as those betrayals I talked about in the beginning. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I have a little anecdote for the betrayal thing if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, betrayal is about a presumed contract. If people are trying to resolve crisis around betrayal, they specifically have to get incredibly conscious about their contracts and start to communicate them. And what people who constantly struggle with betrayal start to notice is that when they put the contract on the table, most of the people in their life would say no to it. So they haven't even surrounded themselves in the first place with people who actually agree to those conditions. And I think that's another problem with mankind in general, is that we tend to assume that everyone's going to have the same contract. Like, you're friends with me, the presumed contract is don't talk behind my back, right? But that's not like that's not a presumption, actually. That's accurate, because most people wouldn't even see that as a betrayal. So what's really interesting about what I'm suggesting is that in all of your relationships, no matter what it is, become really conscious of what the expectation is, and then communicate it directly and see what the response is, because it's only then that you can see either you're totally incompatible with this person, or else you guys can find some third option that makes sense, and so nobody's going to get their boundaries crossed.
Yeah, you know something, you helped me understand something. It's not even the betrayal as it is, as much as it is a lie. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, yeah, you're right. You have to, and I'm very outspoken. I usually say, no, seriously, like, yeah, I usually say, hey, this is this and that, and it's fine, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, like, I'd lay out the conditions, if you can call it so, straight. But it's lies. It's the lies behind it, and
like what? Well, so can I? So there's a bit of a discrepancy between what you're saying, because when you say that, you're good at that in business, but not good at that in personal relationships, especially emotionally. Like, it's you when it comes to vulnerability, especially. This is what I need and want in order to have a good relationship. That's where the growth path is. It's not, I know you're very good with that, with like, this is what I expect. It's more like, okay, what I need, for example, in a friendship, pretend I'm you. In a friendship, what I really, really need is a perception of alliance. Like, I need to feel like even if we don't see each other for a month, for 2 months, I know that I can count upon, you're the person who, if somebody comes behind my back to you and says, maybe Teal really is a narcissist. You're the one that knows me well enough that's like, no way in hell. That's actually, it's a vulnerable feeling in me to say, like, this is a contract of mine that equals friendship for me. Do you see?
Yeah.
So that, like, with regards to your own expansion path, that's the way.
Interesting. I will, I'm sure we watched this part over and over, and very, very cool. So
okay, go back to lying. So you wanted to go to lying. I'm sorry. So you have a problem with people lying.
Say it again.
You wanted to talk about lying.
Oh, the lying. Yes. Well, it's just, as you were explaining it to me, it kind of became even more clear that it's not as much of a betrayal, because, like, remember, it's a package of cocktail, like you called it. It comes in, like, with all these different little ingredients. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, yeah. So here's the thing. So your expectation, if you hate lying, is that people are always going to tell you their authentic truth.
I guess.
You're screwed. You want to know why? Most people don't know themselves well enough to even give you that. And this has been, it's like, honestly, the more conscious you get, you'll go through a phase of, like, almost futility around this before you become okay with the fact that most people who run into you don't even know themselves well enough to know whether what they're agreeing to or not is actually in alignment with themselves. So part of this is being more conscious than other people.
Interesting.
But I mean, I think it would be healthier for you. I mean, obviously, it's not fun when people lie to you, but, you know, it's almost like easier to let go of that. If I was to give you my 2 cents, I think it would be easier for you to let go of that expectation and to, like, ground yourself in the reality that people are only going to be able to agree to something to the degree they know themselves, rather than continuously get disappointed by people.
Does that mean, I mean, because I'm a very, like, I keep open, I keep myself open and trusting, because I don't want to cut that.
That's a mistake. That's a mistake.
It's a mistake?
It's a mistake to keep yourself trusting. Oh. Yes. Because, see, to trust is to rely upon someone to capitalize on your best interests. People, number one, have to prove that first, right? So I know that I'm really contradicting most people here with this. Yeah,
I like it. Yeah.
Well, that's because it feels good. It feels better. It feels more in alignment to be in a state of trust. But, like, I think that these teachings actually damage people a lot, and it's retardation, honestly, even from a higher perspective. It's actually retarded to have complete trust. That's like, I mean, are you going to go swimming with cuts and be like, oh, I trust that no shark's going to bite me? I mean, that's actually what we're doing with other people. It's like if a person has a pattern, right? Let's say a person has a pattern of never being able to stick up for what they believe. And that's not them being mean, right? That's just they have a pattern of not being able to stick up for themselves. You therefore cannot trust them to do that. You can't. It's retarded. So it's about, like, you'll find people in your life who are more trustworthy, right? You can trust more of them. But I want you to start to look at all people in terms of degrees. This person, I can 100% trust them with this. This person, I can definitely not trust them with this. And so then it's about, where do I place them in my life given that information? And I feel like, you know, it would serve us to look at it this way, because even in companies, we don't have to, like, only have a company of trustworthy people, which is actually impossible to create. It's that, you know, this person can be trusted to 100% never drop the ball. Can they be trusted to be super sweet with people when they get confronted? No. All right, probably not putting them in a PR position, probably putting them in some sort of a leadership position, right? So it's about like creating that pliability so you can see where to fit people based on what you can and can't trust them with, and you don't know to begin with what you can trust them with and not. You don't. So it's the bravery you're talking about is the bravery to see. There's got to be a willingness to see, and then based off of what happens, make an adjustment. If you want safe relationships, It's very simple, actually. The ingredient for a safe relationship, which is what you're actually talking about in terms of a trustworthy relationship, it's a person who consistently takes your best interest as part of their own. It's a person who you see over and over again wants to create resolve. Doesn't just put 100% of the resolve on your table. Right? This is a person who, if they have an issue with you, they're not going to fly off the handle and go talk to someone. If they have an issue, they're going to be like, okay, I need to talk to you about something. I want to resolve it. And you actually see the desires resolve. It's not winning or any other weird, bizarre stuff. So a safe relationship is about a person who does that. They take responsibility for maintaining the connection. They take your best interest as part of themselves, so they're always trying to find the third option between if there's a conflict in best interests, what is the third option? Or is this a person who's going to address the incompatibility directly? Meaning that, like, there may be circumstances in your life where there is no third option. And it's about, what do we do with that now? Because if you and I create the what do we do with that now, it's still safe. If one of us does that and the other one doesn't, it's not safe, right? So that's a safe person. And another element here that you're going to have to go in the direction of to create that trust with people is to have people who are dedicated to awareness. Because like I said, like even the most conscious people in the world, you can't expect them to completely know themselves. So they can't 100% represent their accurate truth. So the safest that you will get is a person who's constantly committed to that. A person who is going to be like, all right, let me see what's true for me. And I'm open to doing processes around what's true for me. And then I'm going to communicate what's true for me.
I really love how you always bring perspective onto a completely different side. It's amazing. Thank you. I don't know if you want to talk about it real quick, because I know the time is almost up. It's, the internet and everything is flooded with build your own reality thing. I do believe it's fully, you know what I'm saying? But I've noticed there's not a single video where you specifically talk about that. But in every single video, you talk about aspects of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, I'd like to personally hear from you.
Why I don't do that directly?
No, actually. Do you believe in, well, obviously double slit experiment and all of that stuff. So, and I know you're an incredibly sophisticated person, but I really want to hear that from you. You know, do you believe in, creating your own reality, and how do you, Teal, approach that?
We do create our own reality, but so does everyone else. Now, what most people don't get about our time-space reality is we actually live in a consensus reality. In a consensus reality, everyone is contributing to a collective reality, and everyone has incredible influence over it, actually. And you have the most influence, obviously, over your immediate surroundings. I mean, it's obvious in the physical reality. If it's your home and you rearrange a couch, you have obvious influence over your reality. So it's not arguable that we create our own reality. But so does everyone else. And it's my issue, and the reason actually that I haven't done a video directly on how to create your own reality is because it's an escape mechanism. And this is the opposite of what I teach. What I teach is actually integration. So
right.
Most people who are touting the drum of I create my own reality are actually the most narcissistic humans alive. They're the people who are looking to unplug from everyone and everything else and simply create this bubble for themselves that feels good all the time. And this actually defies the universal law of oneness, which I have a big issue with. So it's actually creating a separation, which is the problem here. So I don't support that at all. It's about creating, but also owning all things in existence as part of yourself.
So there's this comment, and I actually ran into that quite recently. Everyone is you pushed out.
Yes.
Have you heard that one?
Yes.
What do you think of that?
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Everyone is you pushed out, but what about the perception of seeing everything as part of you?
This is where I'm trying to get people to go. That's exactly where I'm trying to get everyone to go, because it's the reality.
Right.
So I'm more interested in people accepting reality and then from there deciding what they want to do with it than I am creating their own reality. Because I mean, creating your own reality stuff is one of those, it's actually one of the most dangerous teachings, even though it's coming from an accurate space.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Well, look what people are doing with it. I mean, I can't think of anything worse right now. Like, I remember the speech I heard that I just like literally didn't want to be in this business anymore for a day. So it was the speech about stop caring about what's happening with the polar bears. Like, if you don't focus on climate change and you just create your own reality, there will be no more climate issues. And I literally was like, I'm done. No, I mean, this is not what needs to happen. What needs to happen is when we take all things as part of ourselves, but also without giving ourselves away, we start to realize where our place is in terms of the co-creative process on Earth. So I have a totally different vision than most people do around create your own reality, and I don't like what's being done with it. But I mean, this is how any teaching can go, and I feel like that needs to be understood and isn't really properly understood. It's quite dangerous to lock onto any one teaching because anything can become a problem. I mean, a person can shadow work themselves into self-hatred. A person can meditate themselves into escapism. A person can create their own reality into a complete narcissistic bubble where everyone on the outside could be screaming and dying, and they're like, well, if I don't focus on it, it isn't there, you know? There's so many shadows inherent in taking anything too far to a polarity or to an extreme.
Right. In a couple of words, because I heard this from a very close friend of mine, and I had no answer to that one.
Oh God. Okay.
And the person is someone I respect and I know is highly intelligent, etc. Not very spiritual. So if everything is one, then how come we have our identities? You know what I'm saying? That I feel that I know the answer, especially when I get into my meditative state, but I'm not eloquent enough to, put it out there.
Okay, it's very simple. If I take a plane of glass and I take my hand and I shatter the glass, it's all glass still, but there are fragments. Can you pick up a fragment and say that it's identical to the next now?
No.
That's why. So it's about, and what we're having to do here, and this is the thing, I'm not even advocating for only believing in oneness. Separation and oneness are both truths in this universe. It's about integrating them. So it's about bringing into our separation reality. It's about bringing more of that oneness into it. And in the oneness experience, it's about bringing a little bit more of the awareness of separation into it. And what actually happens is that manifestation becomes a choice from that point. Because actually the fragmentation that created all of these individual fragments was an unconscious process within Source itself. So it won't be. Once there's an integration between the separation, the fragments, and the mirror itself, now that fragmenting process becomes a choice instead of something that just happens. And that's quite beautiful. It looks more like art does. Most people wouldn't think of art as a fragment, but it actually is. There's potential energy, and then suddenly there's this thing that emerges out of the potential energy. A flower, an art piece, whatever it is, but it can be consciously created at that point.
Right.
Does that explanation count or no?
Very good. Yes, wonderful. Thank you. And final thing, again, going back to the consciousness of on the national level, right? The cultural level. What do you think different, and I'll show you something in a minute, and you can make it as quick as you want to, but why do you think certain nationalities treasure certain crystals or stones more than the other? For instance, our culture and Native Americans, we're the same DNA, basically, same kind of people, same thing with the Siberian people. We love turquoise. But the nation, the Chinese people, for instance, they treasure jade. We have tons of jade in Kazakhstan, but nobody cares. This is jade from Kazakhstan, for example.
Yeah.
And is there any specific way that the consciousness of certain nation had, evolved within the time frame where they treasure one thing over the other or something like this?
I would love to have the explanation be a hell of a lot more mystical than this. There sometimes is an esoteric element, which is that every stone has a specific vibration, right? And if you've got a collective of people that have anger issues, they're all going to gravitate towards and value a stone that vibrates at the frequency of calmness more. If anybody came from a tribal setting, for example, the gravitation will be naturally in the direction of turquoise, because it is one of the best tools to create like a harmony amongst a group of people.
Interesting. That was a big issue for our nations because we're very tribal.
Yep.
And throughout the history, it was always about like the tribes fighting each other and then creating the state. You know, the Huns.
Turquoise, and this may not be something I'm probably not conscious. It's that like on that vibrational level, if you pull turquoise into the middle of a conflict, it actually calms the conflict down. So it acts like water on fire. That's the best way to explain it. However, that being said, the majority of the time when you've got a culture that is really cherishing a certain stone over another, it's just because one prominent individual had a preference, and that prominent individual needed to be the person everyone was in with. I mean, it's the same reason why everybody in America wears a white wedding dress. That has to do with one single person, and that's Queen Victoria. That's it. No one wore white dresses before she made it a trend. So...
Well, actually, the tradition of the white clothing and closing the face, it comes from the ancient traditions of the native people, such as myself, where like it's the change, it's basically you die in one family and you are reborn in the other. And tradition is like when a person dies, everyone wears white, not black.
Yeah, which actually is more close to the vibration of death in and of itself. Birth is like a dark energy, actually, and death is light.
Interesting. And the whole tradition of opening face and for the bride to wear white is the same thing, because you literally die in one family and reborn in the other.
But that makes more sense in your culture. In the white culture, the only reason is Queen Victoria. So with stones, sometimes it was quite simply that like some monarch somewhere was like, this is the best in the world, you know, like the Egyptians. It was one pharaoh that was like, oh my God, lapis lazuli, you know, and everyone's now like, oh, that's the one that has the most value. Humans ascribe value, you know, it's look at diamonds. People will be asking me the same thing. Actually, this is a good answer to your question. So people in the future may be like, Teal, why is it that people value diamonds so much, especially given that they're a worthless material? And then at that point, I'm going to have to tell the story about De Beers. It's a really good marketing campaign is the answer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on jade? And that's the last question.
On jade in general? Oh my God, I love jade. Jade is
yeah. I'm in love with this piece.
Jade is like almost like fluorite. Jade is an incredible cellular healer.
Oh.
So it's a healing stone. It's an interesting one because it's a blend between like the earth elements and the water elements. So it's a calming stone, but like a centering stone.
Well, Teal, thank you so much. I feel like I could talk to you forever if that was the possibility. But I know the time is of value, and you know, I just wanted to tell you just how much I personally appreciate everything you do.
Oh, good. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.